Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Man, we're going to talk leadership today with my friend Kurt. Man, I can't wait to hear about it. So let's start right off. How are you doing today, Kurt?
Hey, I'm doing really, really well, Dave. Thanks so much for having me. Super glad to be here.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about it. So, I know you're a leadership expert. How'd you get there, right? It's easy to say I want to be a leader. So the first thing you have to do is raise your hand, but raising your hand doesn't always do it. How'd you get there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I worked in a manufacturing plant for about 10 years. And I started really young. Like I started at the ground floor in this plant. I was like 21, just coming in, no idea what I was doing. And I got some really great opportunities really early on to be around some people who invested in me early on in my life. And I found myself in some leadership roles in that plant that I probably didn't have any business being in. But man, I learned a ton. I supervised the production process for a little bit. I worked with a process improvement engineer for a little bit. I recruited labor for a little bit. This was a company who kind of moved everybody around. I spent a lot of time in a lot of places, but I really loved it. I learned a ton about what it means to lead both a group of people, and a process, because I think those are quite different. Um, yeah, from there, I went to seminary late in life. I was in my 30s. I went to grad school, got my MDiv. From there, then I pastored a couple churches for about another decade. I learned a ton there. I mean, essentially leading volunteers. In a local church context, everybody's volunteer. I supervise some staff, but for the most part, I'm leading other volunteer leaders. I led during 2020. I don't know if you remember 2020, Dave, but there was a couple things going on.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think there's some changes in the world. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Between the pandemic and just kind of cultural upheaval, we had some denominational upheaval going on too, and I really had to shift from being a culture builder into being a coach, helping these volunteer leaders navigate their own anxiety so they could lead well. We really had to take a shift to say, there's so much going on. How do we keep focused on the thing we're trying to lead? And what I learned in that season was I loved doing that. I loved going into a room of volunteer leaders that were anxious and helping them lower their anxiety, helping the temperature come down a little bit. I just loved it. And then what happened is over the course of time, we got away from the pandemic. We got away from some of this cultural upheaval that was so present early on, and the culture took hold. The leaders were coaching each other. They were coaching themselves. My role had to shift more towards an organizational leader than a coach,
Hmm.
and that was really draining for me. About an 18-month process, I determined that I really wanted to start coaching more. I wanted to help more leaders navigate their own anxiety, navigate their stuff, figure out what authenticity means. So I slowly kind of began the transition away from pastoral ministry into coaching full time, and then pulled that trigger in 2024, launched a coaching practice with a good friend. Here we are.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, how do you see leadership? And then let me just explain what I'm talking about. So, obviously, at a manufacturing company or any other company is going to be different than in a pastoral way. True servant leadership, the same type of leader, right? Obviously, you're the same person, but you might look at it differently. How would you look at it? How would they be different?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure that they're different. I think, I mean, objectives are obviously different, right? The metrics are different. How we define success in terms of like what we measure is probably different. But I don't know, Dave. I've been thinking about this actually lately. That my thought of like, am I leading well is like, can I get to the end of a day and look back and say, man, I did the best I could leading people. Like I don't think there's any difference in that for me, whether that was a production process or leading a group of volunteer leaders in a church. Um, like the object of like where my time goes, obviously in a church setting, like I gave a lot of time to like helping people grow. And I couldn't do as much of that in a manufacturing plant. You
Hmm.
have to make sure a process runs.
Right.
But I think at the end of the day, like how I would define success is the same. Like I want to get through the end of the day or get through the end of my time in a plant or in a church and be able to look back and say, I did right by the people, right? And I showed up the way I wanted to.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of that also tells, when you were introducing yourself, I heard that because it's, you knew what type of leader you wanted to do, and even the role, right? The leaders have different roles, right? And the way you do it. And it sounds like not only were you a servant leader, but you're the type of leader who's a true leader because it's when you leave the room, right? You're not authoritative in that it's only works when you're there. You have to be on top of things.
Yeah.
How do you observe that? Because again, you started in the business at 21. So did you have mentors as you were growing up that you started asking about leadership?
Yeah, I had really good mentors. Not right away at 21. I think what I would say, Dave, like I went into leadership thinking the same thing that a lot of people do, that leaders are, the smartest people in the room that have all the answers. And then like you have this authority and you have to keep people in line and keep people in check. I think like I held that. I believed that for a long time. And frankly, I resisted that. Like there was a part of me that didn't want to lead if that's what it meant because I didn't think I had all the answers. I didn't want the pressure of having all the answers. Um, so I mean, I think like I carried that. Like my childhood, my, high school years, like I assumed that's what it meant to be a leader. So then I got to be, 20, 25, whatever, and I'm resisting it because I don't want that. So I did have some really good mentors in the manufacturing world that could help me understand like what does it mean? I had one good mentor that would say that a leader is simply someone who has people following them, like period.
Right. Yeah,
S- s-
which is true, right? But
Yeah.
if you're going up the wrong path, it doesn't matter that they followed you.
That's right. That's right. And people the follow up on that thought is like at any moment you can look back, like metaphorically turn around and those people might not be there anymore. Like people don't have to follow us as leaders. They can have the choice to not follow us. So I
100%.
think that sort of shapes kind of how I began to see of like there are ways to get people to stay behind me, uh, and there are ways that I can really quickly get them to go find another person to follow. So I think that sort of shapes it. I guess I don't often think of it as a servant kind of leadership. I don't. I feel some resistance in that when you say that that's what you're
Okay.
hearing, but uh,
Yeah,
I
so what type of leadership? I mean, there's different types of leadership, and maybe, servant. How I look at it for myself when I look to just put as much of myself into it, that authenticity that I know you talk about, and that you instill in yourself as well as your clients.
yeah
Well, that's what I mean is by showing up as servants. It's not about me. I don't have to be the guy that, everybody's looking at, but I'm going to make sure that once I can identify everything along the way, that's what we do. It doesn't have to be, well, let's give Dave the gold star. I don't need a gold star.
yeah
I want to make sure what sounds like what you do also is what the audience needs, what the community needs.
yeah yeah. That's fair. That's fair. I can get with you on that. I think here's I guess my bigger like 30,000 foot view of leadership is um I get to decide who and how I want to be. And if somebody was to like hold up a mirror to me and they were like, "Man, you're just an authoritative jerk." Like I don't want that. I don't want to see that in the
Sure.
mirror. Like if somebody held up a mirror and said, you just kind of manipulate the people you lead to get the results that you need. Like I don't want that either. So I think I like to consider authentic leadership like what's the kind of leadership that I want to characterize my time? Like who do I want to be as a leader? How do I want to be? And authentic leadership is then trying to align the things that I do and the way that I lead to aspirational, um, those kind of aspirational qualities, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. No, because that was where I was kind of leading us is, how do you lead it from a place of authenticity? A lot of people, the people to me always respond much better through whatever you do, if you're authentic. And how do you do that? What's something that you would suggest?
Yeah, so I always like to define authenticity, and I'd love to hear you I'd love to welcome your voice into this too. I think there's a lot of people that define authenticity as like just this sort of unfiltered presence. Like if I don't have a short temper particularly, but if I have a short temper and I like lash out at you on this podcast, I could say, it's just Kurt, like take me or leave me. I actually don't think that's authenticity. I actually think that's probably the opposite. I think it's probably hiding, actually,
Mm.
hiding behind something that we don't prefer. I actually think most adults, like if you take the narcissist leaders out of this, like most adult leaders, I think want to want to do a good job, want to lead well, want to be a person worth following. So I think authentic leadership is getting really clear on what we want to what we want to be, who we want to be, how we want to be, and then taking actual steps to make that happen. So if you hold up a mirror to me and like I lash out at you, like I can see in that mirror, I don't like this, and I'm going to take tangible steps so that that doesn't happen again. I think that's authentic leadership because I've chosen this is who and how I want to be.
Yeah, no, I think that, well, I think that's where you have to feel comfortable. Where prior, I had a lot more anger issues, so I had, some challenges. Um, but we're the Uncle Dave, so when I talk about that, to me that is so. Where you use the example of, I wouldn't interrupt, I did. I was in a situation where we were with some politicians, and I saw that they had disengaged with the stories that were being told. It was about recovery and women who had lost their children, unfortunately.
Mm,
And I was like looking, and I was burning inside. It was also younger. I might have said it differently this time,
yeah.
at this age. But I said, "Hey, we got to focus on what we're here for." And I kind of E.F. Hutton moment. They all got quiet. The woman who I did interrupt felt bad, and I said, "I'm going to hear your story afterwards. I promise." They're
Mm,
not paying attention, so I threw it on them as a leader, and that's when I took that leadership piece because I wasn't. We only had a short amount of time, so
yeah.
to hear stories that weren't going to get us to the goal, and I, explained it. Was I right? I don't know. It did get us the attention we needed and the focus for everybody in that room, because you could see even everybody in the room that might have lost somebody through substance disease
Yeah.
and things like that. So, there are times you have to kind of shock them,
Yeah.
but, again, personality wise, where some people couldn't do something like that because how it is. And I'm not saying that I was right, but I, a leader knows sometimes what you need to do. And that's
Yes.
why there can't only be one leader leading a certain way. It's
Yeah.
always good to have that counterbalance.
Yeah, I love what you said, Dave. And here's what I want to affirm in that. Well, I mean, you don't need me to affirm it.
Yeah.
Here's what
I'd love your affirmation.
here's what I agree. Here's where I agree with you. Sorry, Dave.
It's okay.
Uh, so here's where I agree. I think there are very few times when there is a clear right or wrong. Here's what you do to be an authentic leader. I think it's more about the process of how you get there. So
Mm,
what you said about like I had to raise my voice to get to where we were going. I actually think that's okay when we get there from our best thinking, right? I think that's authentic leadership when we have a best thinking, a best self that guides how we get to what we do, versus, I raise my voice because that's just Dave, and that's my kind of dysregulated emotional response. I I love what you said. I think there are so many examples when like the what is secondary to the why or the how.
right. Yeah. And the authenticity is how you show up. So most of the people in that room already knew me. They knew, that that's not my personality to be,
Yeah.
now. And, I provide that safe space. That's where the uncle piece came out. They walked out of there. You're just like that big old uncle, gives you bear hugs, and you can't tell mom and dad everything, but we tell Uncle Dave and he'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And that was the reputation that I got, especially after that day, because it's really how we could see to thrive, right? Leadership is really about thriving. And, what does thriving look like for you in leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think I go back to that idea of being regulated. When I can, when I can show up and make decisions from my best thinking versus this sort of emotional state of being stirred up, I think that's thriving because then I think at the end of the day, I get to go home and look back and say, it was a good day. I'm happy with that, right? I don't metaphorically kick the dog.
No, right.
I would never kick my dog, but metaphorically, right? I also think, I think thriving looks like peace and rest. I mean, I know that sounds kind of cliche and pie in the sky, but the opposite of thriving, I think, looks like exhaustion. It looks like continuing just to grind and grind and grind for something that we'll never get.
Well, yeah, it's knowing, and part of leadership is to know when you need to take a break, right?
Mhm.
I've worked on teams that we've worked 24 hours straight or more at one point, but the leadership was, okay, look, I don't even care about the shower. I need, 2 hours of just don't bother me.
Yeah,
That recharge because we know we're using our energies in different ways.
yeah,
And I know part of the leadership that you strive to talk about is about the reflection. And it's not only, so how do we do that? Like sometimes in the moment you might not be able to reflect, but do you make time even in the heat of the moment to make sure that you're thinking clearly to reflect appropriately for the situation?
yeah. I do. Not all the time. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I said I did it every time. But yeah. I mean, I actually try to schedule it. What we tell our clients sometimes is if reflection is a new practice, and we think reflection is like key and vital to growth. We actually tell clients like put it in your calendar. Like it is hard to find days or find time in our days to even have any quiet moments. Frankly, sometimes it's scary. It's terrifying to be
Sure.
quiet and to be still. We also we try to give some framework too. It can be hard to sit in a space and say, okay, I'm going to reflect on how I showed up today. It can be hard to do that without some sort of framework. So we use a framework that we call our emotion or not our emotional, our transformational equation, which is E plus R equals T. I hate math, Dave. I don't know why we
Me
called
too.
this
Yeah.
equation. I hate it. But we call it E plus R equals T. E is encounter. An encounter is any time where we feel shocked or surprised, or maybe we react in ways that are autopilot or default. Maybe we lash out, maybe we keep quiet, maybe we do something else. And when those happen, we think those actually happen dozens of times a day, if not more. Just the other day, I got an email that was difficult. It was challenging to me, and my autopilot was I reached up and I closed my laptop. I didn't even want to look at it. Not because I needed the space, but because my emotional reaction was not right now, you know? So when those encounters happen, then we invite people to reflect. Maybe it's in the moment, maybe it's 20 minutes later, maybe it's a day later, but we invite people to reflect with some simple questions. What happened? Who was involved? What emotions stirred up? What did I do? And maybe most importantly, if when I have that encounter again, because I will I do I want to do anything different? And we think that leads to transformation because most of us as adults, if we can see, oh, I want to do something different, most of us then feel the agency to take steps to make it different. Not that that's easy or simple. It's probably our equation oversimplifies a little bit, but we think that that reflection piece is absolutely vital to that idea of doing something different next time.
Sure. And it's having it. But I guess one of the questions that I would probably expect a lot of us to have is that inner voice, right? That inner critic,
Yeah.
as well as cheerleader, right? So,
Yeah.
but how do we know which should win the battle, right? How do we have those leaders with the strong inner critic, but also don't work towards the perfection, obstacle?
Yeah, that's a great question. The inner critic is prominent in most of us. Is loud in most of us. And I always like to say I'm not sure the inner critic is always bad, right? I think there's this idea that You know, sometimes our inner critic is drawing our attention to something that needs worked on, right? Here's how I know the difference. I know the difference when it drives me to hide or when it drives me to avoid versus when it drives me to learn and be curious and grow. Um, so here, the example of me closing my laptop, right? The inner critic in me was shouting that I'm this. See, I told you that you're not a good entrepreneur, right? That inner critic led me to close the lid, close my laptop. Now, there is a part of that inner critic that might be able to say, "This was a hard email. I have something to learn from it," right? Because I don't have it all figured out. So I know when my first move after hearing the inner critic is to hide or to avoid. Now that's the inner critic that I don't need to listen to. Uh, the inner critic that drives me to say, okay, what do I have to learn from this? That's probably different and okay.
Yeah, right. And it's right. It's the battle of the two wolves. Which one
Yeah,
do you feed? But
yeah,
also recognizing, that's also the part that we always miss is like, are you recognizing that it's a obstacle, a difficult conversation, and okay, I'm not in the mindset to
yeah,
be able to handle it appropriately.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a difference between avoiding and preparing, right? Like
Correct.
if I closed the laptop lid like from my best thinking because I needed a minute to catch my breath, I think that's completely fine. That goes again back to that idea of like what we do is probably less important than why or how. Yeah, so I think you're spot on, Dave.
Yeah, it really goes to the showing of, I guess, how to get unstuck, right?
Yeah,
Recognizing and having the emotional intelligence to say, okay, one, maybe I could have done something better, or the client's not seeing it the way that we need to.
yeah,
But it's also getting unstuck with, our past, looking into
yeah,
those things. How
yeah.
do you help leaders to get unstuck in their ways, right? They come to you, is generally it's not because they're having unicorns and lollipops.
Yeah, that's right. We believe in a couple things. First, we believe that all of us had a first formation, meaning that that we are formed by people and things that happen to us in like our elementary school years to our high school years. We are all formed. None of us get a choice. We are all formed. Um, we believe that in that first formation, there are moments of what we call little t trauma. Those are not catastrophic, life-changing events, but they are moments where we are embarrassed or we are laughed at or we feel pain. And in those moments, we make what we call protective promises. Those protective promises are promises that we subconsciously make to ourselves that we will never let that happen again. Um, I can trace one of those back to third grade for me, where something super embarrassing happened, and I told myself that I'm never going to let that happen again, which is great in third grade and fourth grade. Like we need that, right?
Sure.
Uh, the problem is 35-year-old Kurt, 40-year-old Kurt doesn't need it the same way. It actually interferes. So we believe a lot of the stuckness begins with or is rooted in some of these old protective promises where our nervous systems just like can't tell the difference between third grade and 40-year-old Kurt.
Well, right, and that's part of the challenge is that's that neurology, because that's how we learn, right? It's a fight or flight system. One of the
Yep.
techniques I teach people is how to kind of rewire or optimize their amygdala response system, and stop the flight or fight. And that's what happens. But like the ironic part is in sixth grade, I had problems. I had speaking.
Mm.
I had to do one of those presentations, and back in the day, there wasn't all these computers, or definitely not spell check. And I said the word statistics wrong, but I wrote statics. So that's how I
Uh,
read it
yep.
when I'm reading it. And then the teacher made fun of me in class.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I didn't want to speak in public. And now here I am on podcasts, stages, and working with clients to
Yeah.
help them speak better.
Yeah.
It's knowing and recognizing those obstacles.
Yeah. 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 Our nervous systems are so good at keeping us safe. And that's great. But our nervous system is also really bad at realizing that the threat isn't the same anymore.
Mm, yeah, that's the hard part is not recognizing that it's there. How
Yeah.
do you, when you work with somebody, how do you work into that? You know, we don't, once you hear it, you can identify it, but you don't go, "Hey, I remember in third grade you're telling me this story." You have to, I know you are, uh, more reserved to say that.
Yeah. 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 So I mean, this is like it took me a long time to get to third grade, right? So like this is a long process. We begin with people just to kind of help them understand, like, is it possible that the behavior that you're doing, or the stuckness that you feel, or the automatic response that you do that keeps you stuck? We simply just like to ask, like, is it possible that it's rooted in something other than I'm a bad leader? Because I think that's where most people start, is like, I'm a bad leader.
Right. I
Well,
can't do this.
yep.
The negative language that comes around it.
Yep, yep. Good leaders don't get stuck like this. So we begin really gently. Like we try to, gentleness is sort of one of the values that we hold to in how we work with people. But we try to kind of gently just like sow the seeds of like, well, what if this is rooted somewhere else? Like our coaching philosophy is that the solution to getting unstuck is already in our clients. Our job is to ask the right question at the right time to begin to uncover pieces of that.
Mm.
So it usually, not usually, it always begins with a series of questions. And one of my favorite questions is, "What's the threat?" Right? So I have a client who is kind of a lasher. Like this person will lash out at people. That's their kind of automatic nervous system response. And the question of like, what's the threat in that moment that you're protecting yourself against from or against? Like that question slowly over time begins to uncover a little bit of like, okay, here's what I might be afraid of. And then we can really ask, like, is it true? Like, is the threat, I mean, obviously it feels real, you
Right,
know?
right. And that's the problem is you and I can experience two separate things, and feel something differently, but it feels true to both of us.
Yeah. Yeah. So we do we try to replace, like, we acknowledge protective promises,
Hmm.
and then we try to, I mean, you mentioned neurology, like we try to recreate pathways by creating what we call purposeful promises, that they replace those. So when a protective promise makes me want to keep from looking dumb or being embarrassed, I need a purposeful promise that stops me, that reminds me of what's true, not what that feeling and what my nervous system is telling me might happen, but what's actually true. So that's kind of the progression of that. We have another we have then preferred promise, like we like peas, right? We alliterate. But it is really
It's a great
about,
way to learn.
yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so purposeful promise again stops that protective promise. If well, I'll just tell you,
Yeah.
it's a podcast. My protective promise was that I'm never going to let somebody think I'm dumb.
Mm.
In third grade, I was in a spelling bee and I was kicking butt, and I was one of three left in my little Illinois elementary school spelling bee. Parents,
Mm.
gymnasium full of parents and kids. I'm top three, and I get a word. My word is farm, which is crazy in third grade. What an easy third grade word, right? I walk up to the mic and I spell farm, F-R-A-M, and the bell goes. The moderator rings the bell, and I got it wrong. And I sit down, and my friends are laughing at me. And I honestly, Dave, when I am near my family for the holidays this year, they still might, like 40 years later, they still might say FRAM. So in that moment, my protective promise was, I'm never gonna let somebody think I'm dumb because it hurts.
Hmm. Yeah, sure.
So then that, as an adult, would stop me from sharing my voice, stop me from contributing in meetings. So my purposeful promise is that I'm here on purpose, right?
Mm.
That I'm not in this board meeting on accident. I'm here on purpose, and I have a voice to share. So when "don't look dumb" pops up in me, I have this purposeful promise that stops me, and it keeps me from clamming up. It keeps me from doing the things that aren't helpful. So then I also, we move people then into a preferred promise. So we stop ourselves with our purposeful promise, and then we have this preferred promise that says, now how am I going to be? I've stopped myself from doing the autopilot response. Now how am I going to be? So my preferred promise is, I say what's so for me. Simple as that, and that allows me to share my voice.
Well, it's a powerful reframe if we're going to use the words FRAM, right? So it's
Yeah,
reframing it, and I really love that because that's helps us with our perception,
yeah,
seeing it differently or making those preferred promises to ourselves.
yeah, yeah,
That's really powerful because at the end of the day, we're in our head all the time, and what are we really doing? And I've done that plenty of times where I've talked myself out of it, but then I also have talked myself into it because I always say, if you're going to doubt anything, doubt your doubts.
yeah,
So, all these things when I'm like, all right, I'm going to speak my mind, and
yeah,
obviously depending on the audience, I make sure the audience gets it received the right way, and that's where it really is. So now that you're doing this full time, that you've moved along in your progression of life, what are you seeing in the leadership world right now in terms of where, which is good. I think we're speaking more as leaders. It's not a dirty secret or even a clean secret that only a few know. It's really talking about it in places like this
yeah,
and elsewhere.
yeah, yeah. Good question. I'm a little biased because the people we work with are people that share our values. The sort of like old mental model, narcissistic kind of authoritarian leadership, like those people, we don't get to talk to those people. So I think what I would say, knowing maybe there's a bias, I do think there is a shift. I think having conversations about authenticity, having conversations about vulnerability, in leadership, I think has shifted so much, even in the last 10 years. I don't know what part the pandemic played in that, but I do think it is far more acceptable today to equate the words authenticity and vulnerability with leader than it ever has been. And I rejoice in that. I mean, I think that shift is a long time coming. I think the what used to be considered weakness in a leader, things, again, vulnerability, curiosity, maybe even some form of like self-doubt, like being able to say, I don't know all the answers, but I know how to get them, like those things used to be seen as weakness not that long ago, and they're just not seen that same way anymore. So I think that's really good.
Yeah, I think that I agree. I think the pandemic allowed some of that because when the
Yeah,
world shut down, in a lot of places, leaders reached out to their coworkers and people who they were responsible for just to
yeah,
check in. Are you okay?
yeah,
And you had to be vulnerable.
yeah,
While that might not have been across the board, and maybe some of it was shifting now, because the world is sort of coming back to where we went, but now with wide eyes open.
yeah,
It's not, while we're working just as hard, if not harder now than we did. The environment is so much more difficult now than it
yeah,
had been, but
yeah,
we're able to kind of say a little bit more. Now you could talk to your boss. I mean, generally and be like, "Hey, I just need a couple hours,"
yeah.
or the kids have a ball game, and depending on the job, there's a lot more flexibility to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the conversation around like sustainability and longevity is different today too. Um, I,
100%.
I think organizations, I mean, I don't know, like I have this really strong belief that longevity and sustainability are so important to organizations, rather than like, let's churn and burn through these leaders. And I think organizations are finally actually starting to see like, we can invest a little bit now and increase longevity. uh, that's different today too, and I think that's great. I think that only helps leaders. It only increases, that sense of thriving and wholeness too.
Yeah, and there's a focus on that as well.
Yeah,
I'm hoping that, personally, I really didn't. So 2 years ago, I got a golden handshake from the company I was working for, and because of the age, I said I had all this experience. I'm not looking to, I'm still looking for a lot of years of being
yeah,
in corporate, and but a lot of people with the ageism.
yeah,
So that
yeah,
has become much more difficult because what's funny, so now I have a 2 year looking back on I was able to have a different job afterwards, but I'm watching some of the jobs I applied for are now rotating in and out
Yeah.
of new people that they must have hired within that 2 years.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's the one part that I really hope that leaders start looking at. Let's not look at ageism because we're living longer, we're taking care of things,
Yeah.
and sometimes you might have to pay and a little bit more, but what does turnover mean? And that's where I'm going to go
Yeah.
with that. What is
Yeah.
turnover, and as leaders, how do we deal with turnover or try to avoid it because we want to keep our team as together as possible?
Yeah, the HR in me, Dave, like just when you say turnover, like wants to scream. Like the cost of churning and burning, I mean, it's ridiculous. And the value of this kind of continuous longevity, it just makes so much sense. Like invest in people, invest in rest. I have a client who is a nonprofit executive director, and he's on a sabbatical right now, which I know kind of has a religious undertone to it, but um, it's 3 months of like intentional, like I'm gonna get myself right. I'm gonna examine what my next steps are. I'm gonna come back better than ever. And like part of my work with the client is be helping them be okay when someone around them is like, why do you get 3 months off? Well, it's because their organization is investing in the long-term leadership that they've decided is the leader of our organization, right? Like this is not a bad investment. This is
Right.
actually this is a great investment.
Right. And I think that's what we have to look at it is what investment do we want for our, as a company, as a corporation, our long-term success, and how do we make that happen?
Yeah, agreed.
All right. I know we're getting close to the end of the episode, and what I usually do is I have everybody. You've given us so much to think about, and but I'd like you to come into my magic garden. And what I do is just the one piece of advice, either for leadership or anything else, that we can plant a seed. Some seeds grow different, and sometimes people are going to need to kind of nurture it and take care of it. Would you have something like that you can share with us?
Yeah, it's probably less of a piece of advice and more just what I like to say to people. I think there's a lot of people, Dave, that just feel exhausted and feel overwhelmed and just don't have any idea that there's another way. Just don't have any idea that there's a way of leading and living that doesn't have to feel frustrated and overwhelmed. Um, I think a lot of people think that's what it just means to be an adult. And I just like to tell people I don't think it has to be that way. I don't think it means life is always easy, but I do think there is a way to even engage in hard seasons of leadership or work or life that feel like thriving. It just doesn't have to continue to be that way. My tip is always find someone you trust that you can share how you're feeling with. Hey, I feel exhausted. Just find somebody to share with it. I think naming and verbalizing those things goes a long way.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you. And I think that's right. We're not in it alone, and we have people like you helping great leaders and leading that much further. So thank you so much. How can we find you? How do we find Brimstone? I know your company, so
Yeah, our website's the best way. Brimstonecoachinggroup.com. Myself and one of my good friends, we are the Brimstone Coaching Group, just the two of us. We have a way on our website to book some time with either myself or my partner to see if our philosophy matches where a listener might feel stuck. That's completely free of obligation as well. We also have a podcast. You can find links for that on our website. Or we have a book right over my shoulder here. That's a great way for people to kind of get a glimpse into the Brimstone Coaching Group and why and how we do what we do.
the name of the book?
Live fully, lead authentically. It can be found print or electronically anywhere you buy books.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your knowledge and sharing us a little bit more about leadership and your take on it.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Good to be here.
Okay. And for everybody else, always wishing you peace and love in your life as a great foundation. And when you're bringing it back, just be awesome today and always bring authentic thoughts.